Reach out and pick up the small salt shaker sitting quietly on your dining table. Tilt it gently in your hand and watch the tiny white crystals slide against the glass. They look so ordinary, so cheap, and so familiar that we almost never stop to think about them. Yet hidden within those sparkling grains lies one of the most extraordinary stories in human history. For thousands of years, this simple white substance was not merely a seasoning. It was life, it was power, and it was wealth. Humans traveled thousands of kilometers to obtain it, built trade routes for it, taxed it, stole it, and even fought wars over it. There were times in history when salt was so valuable that people called it white gold. The story of salt is not just the story of a mineral. It is a story of human survival, geopolitics, power, and the relentless desire to control the most essential resources nature has given us. To understand why salt held such immense value, we must first look at our own bodies. Humans cannot survive without salt. Sodium chloride plays a vital role in conducting nerve impulses, enabling muscles to contract, and maintaining the balance of fluids within our cells. Every heartbeat, every thought, and every movement in our bodies depends on the presence of salt. In prehistoric times, our ancestors did not worry about finding salt because they were hunter-gatherers who lived mostly on meat. Raw meat, blood, and organs from animals naturally contained enough sodium for the human body to function properly. But around 10,000 years ago, a major turning point in human history occurred: the agricultural revolution. Humans began to settle down, cultivate crops, and rely more heavily on grains, vegetables, and plant-based foods. The problem was that these foods contained very little sodium. From that moment forward, salt became something humans had to actively seek. It was no longer naturally abundant in the human diet. People began searching for every possible way to extract salt from nature. In coastal regions, they boiled seawater or dried salt ponds under the sun to collect white crystals. Deep inland, they dug into the earth to find ancient salt deposits, remnants of oceans that had disappeared millions of years ago. Wherever salt was found, wealth and power soon followed. But the greatest value of salt in the ancient world was not only nutritional, it was its ability to preserve food. Before refrigerators were invented, before chemical preservatives existed, food had a single inevitable enemy: time. Meat and fish spoiled quickly. Fruits and vegetables decayed within days. In such a world, famine was always a looming threat. Salt completely changed this reality. When salt is applied to food, it draws water out of bacteria through a process called osmosis, preventing them from surviving or reproducing. As a result, meat and fish could be preserved for months, even years. Thanks to salt, humans could store food for the winter, feed large cities, and most importantly supply armies traveling far from home. Salt became a foundation for the stability of entire civilizations. In ancient Egypt, salt also carried sacred meaning. The Egyptians believed that the soul needed a preserved body in order to journey into the afterlife, which is why they developed the famous practice of mummification. In this process, a natural salt mixture called natron was used to remove all moisture from the body and prevent decay. Thanks to salt, the bodies of pharaohs could remain preserved for thousands of years. To the Egyptians, salt did not only preserve food, it preserved eternity. In the East, Chinese dynasties quickly realized that salt could also be a powerful political tool. Because every person needed salt to live, the state could control the entire economy simply by controlling its supply. For this reason, the government established a salt monopoly and forced citizens to buy salt from the state. The enormous profits generated by this monopoly helped fund massive construction projects and military campaigns. In ancient Rome, salt also played an extremely important role. One of the oldest roads leading into Rome was called the Salt Road, where salt harvested from coastal regions was transported into the heart of the empire. Salt was so valuable that Roman soldiers were sometimes paid with it. The Latin word salarium, meaning payment in salt, eventually evolved into the English word salary, which we still use today. If a soldier performed poorly, people would say he was not worth his salt. Salt even reflected social hierarchy during the Middle Ages. On the dining tables of nobles, a large salt container was placed near the host. The most honored guests were seated above the salt, close to the container, while those of lower status were seated below the salt. Simply where one sat in relation to the salt determined their social standing. In West Africa, the value of salt was even more astonishing. In ancient kingdoms such as Ghana and Mali, salt was so rare that it was sometimes traded pound for pound with gold. Huge camel caravans carried blocks of salt across the harsh Sahara Desert, transporting it from northern mines to southern regions where it was desperately needed. These journeys were incredibly dangerous due to the scorching heat, sandstorms, and the constant threat of dehydration. But the profits were so great that merchants continued making the journey year after year. Because of the salt trade, cities like Timbuktu became famous centers of commerce and knowledge. In Europe, many cities also grew wealthy because of salt. Venice controlled much of the salt trade across the Mediterranean Sea, while the Austrian city of Salzburg, whose name literally means salt fortress, prospered, thanks to massive salt mines in the surrounding mountains. However, because salt was so essential, governments often imposed heavy taxes on it, and this frequently sparked rebellions. In France, a notorious salt tax forced every citizen to purchase a minimum amount of salt from the government at extremely high prices. This injustice lasted for centuries and eventually became one of the factors that fueled the French Revolution. Centuries later, salt again became a symbol of freedom in India when Mahatma Gandhi led the famous Salt March in 1930 to protest the British monopoly on salt. Gandhi walked hundreds of kilometers to the sea and picked up a handful of salt from the shore, a small but powerful act that ignited a nationwide movement for independence. Even in modern warfare, salt remains strategically important. During the American Civil War, the blockade of salt supplies created severe difficulties for the Confederate Army in preserving food for its soldiers. However, by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, everything began to change. Modern mining technology allowed humans to discover vast underground salt deposits, and mass production made salt incredibly cheap. Even more importantly, the invention of the refrigerator dramatically reduced the need to preserve food using salt. From something once as valuable as gold, salt gradually became a common commodity that anyone could afford. Today, salt is used in more than 14,000 different applications, from melting ice on winter roads to supporting the global chemical industry. Yet even though it has become ordinary, the legacy of salt still lives on in our language, culture, and history. The story of salt reminds us of a profound truth. The simplest things are often the ones that shape the world most powerfully. Humanity once built empires for salt, fought wars for salt, and wrote history because of salt. Entire trade routes stretched across continents because of it. Kings grew rich from it. Revolutions ignited because people were denied it. What now sits quietly on our tables was once powerful enough to influence the destiny of nations. So the next time you sprinkle a little salt onto your meal, pause for just a moment. Look closely at those tiny white crystals falling from your fingers. Each grain carries the weight of thousands of years of human struggle, ingenuity, ambition, and survival. Those crystals once traveled across scorching deserts on the backs of camels. They once passed through the hands of merchants, soldiers, emperors, and revolutionaries. They once funded the building of walls, the rise of cities, and the expansion of empires. It is easy to forget how extraordinary something can be once it becomes ordinary. Salt has become so common, so inexpensive, so invisible in our daily lives that we rarely think about the epic story hidden within it. Yet every grain is a reminder of how deeply human civilization depends on the quiet gifts of nature. Long before modern technology, long before electricity or engines or digital networks, a simple mineral crystal helped sustain life, preserve food, fuel economies, and shape the course of history. Perhaps that is the most powerful lesson salt leaves behind. The forces that shape our world are not always the grandest or the most obvious. Sometimes they are the quiet, humble things we overlook every day. A tiny crystal, a pinch of white powder, something so small it can rest on the tip of your finger, yet strong enough to move armies, inspire revolutions, and build civilizations. So when that final sprinkle of salt lands on your meal, remember that you are touching more than a seasoning. You are touching a relic of humanity's journey, an ancient treasure that once rivaled gold, a silent witness to thousands of years of triumph and struggle, and a reminder that even the smallest things can change the fate of the world.